our perfect suburban street vibrated with the quiet hum of conformity, a sound that lulled everyone into a false sense of security, until the Hells Angels rolled in, and I, a quiet teenager, suddenly found myself screaming in the middle of the street to stop a deadly plot. The suburbs have a sound. It's a low hum of conformity. The whir of sprinklers at dawn, the polite chime of an ice cream truck in the afternoon, the distant drone of a lawnmower on a Saturday. It's the sound of peace, of safety, of everything being exactly where it's supposed to be. For the first 16 years of my life, that was my world. My parents, both doctors, had bought into the American dream with a 2-story colonial on a street where every lawn was a perfect green carpet, and every picket fence was a gleaming, uniform white. We were the only black family on the block, a fact that was never spoken aloud but was always present, like a ghost at a dinner party. It was in the way Mrs. Henderson from next door would clutch her purse a little tighter if I walked past her driveway. It was in the way Mr. Henderson would always find a reason to complain about our excessively loud family barbecues, even when the only other sound on the street was his own leaf blower. They smiled, of course. They waved. They brought over a Jell-O mold when we first moved in. But their eyes held a certain kind of cold, assessing quality, like we were a stain on their perfect canvas they were just waiting for a good rain to wash away. Then the Hells Angels moved in. Well, they didn't exactly move in. They rented the big, slightly neglected house at the end of the cul-de-sac, the one that had been on the market for a year. Suddenly, the suburban hum was shattered by the guttural thunder of a dozen Harley-Davidsons. They rolled in one Tuesday afternoon, a rumbling procession of leather, chrome, and beards that looked like they'd been braided with thunderclouds. They didn't look like they belonged. They looked like they'd ridden straight out of a movie about the end of the world and decided our quiet little street was a good place to park. The neighborhood Facebook group exploded. Coded language flew fast and furious. Unsavory characters. Concerns about property values. Is it even legal for that many people to live in one house? My dad just shook his head, scrolling through the comments on his phone. They're more scared of these guys' leather jackets than they ever were of us, he muttered. And I knew he was right. The bikers were a new, more obvious target for the neighborhood's simmering prejudice. Mr. Henderson immediately appointed himself the unofficial head of the Neighborhood Safety Committee, which was really just him and a few other dads standing on his lawn, pointing and muttering. I'd see him from my bedroom window, his face pinched with a kind of righteous fury. He'd make a big show of calling the police for noise violations that were nothing more than a bike starting up. He'd document their comings and goings in a little notebook, his lips moving as he counted them. The bikers, for their part, mostly kept to themselves. They were loud, yeah, and their parties sometimes went late, but they weren't bothering anyone. In fact, one of them, a guy with a skull tattoo snaking up his neck and kind eyes, helped my mom carry in our groceries one day when a bag split open in the driveway. He just grunted, picked up the scattered oranges, and carried the heavy bags to our door without a word before heading back to his own yard. My mom was flustered but grateful. Mrs. Henderson watched the whole thing from behind her lace curtains, her face a mask of pure disgust. The tipping point came a few weeks later. The bikers were planning some kind of big ride, a long-distance run. You could feel the energy in the air. For 2 days their yard was a hive of activity. They were cleaning their bikes, tuning engines, polishing chrome until it gleamed. The sound of wrenches and rock music filled the air. And Mr. Henderson was watching. Always watching. His rage had been simmering for weeks, and now it was about to boil over. That night, I couldn't sleep. A summer storm was rolling in, and the air was thick and heavy. I was sitting at my window sketching in my notepad when I saw movement in the Hendersons' yard. It was long after midnight. A shadow detached itself from his garage and slipped across the lawn. It was Mr. Henderson. He was dressed in all black, moving with a creepy, deliberate slink that made the hair on my arms stand up. He wasn't carrying his little notebook. He was carrying a small toolbox. He crept into the biker's driveway, which was packed with at least 10 magnificent, chrome-laden motorcycles, parked in a neat row like sleeping iron beasts. He moved from bike to bike, crouching down low, out of sight of the streetlights. I saw the glint of metal in his hand, a pair of wire cutters, then a small wrench. He was quick, precise, his movements filled with a venomous purpose. He spent no more than 30 seconds on each bike, a quick snip here, a subtle turn of a bolt there, before moving to the next. A cold dread, slick and oily, coated my throat. I wasn't a mechanic. I didn't know the first thing about motorcycles, but I knew what malice looked like. I knew the look of a man trying to cause harm, and I knew exactly which wires and hoses were located down there by the wheels. Brake lines. He was cutting their brake lines. The next morning the sun was bright, the air washed clean by the storm. The sound of engines starting up, one after another, rumbled through my open window. It was a chorus of impending doom. I looked out and saw them. The bikers were all there, laughing, clapping each other on the back, pulling on their helmets. The leader, the same man who'd helped my mum, swung his leg over his massive chopper at the head of the line. At the end of our street was a steep hill that led down to the main highway. A death trap. My heart hammered against my ribs. Mr. Henderson was standing on his porch, sipping his coffee, a thin, triumphant smirk on his face. The lead biker revved his engine, the sound a deafening promise of departure, and I knew I had only seconds to decide. My brain was a blank screen of pure white terror. There was no time for a plan, no time to call my parents or dial 911. The engine noise was a physical thing, a vibration that shook our windows and rattled in my bones. I saw the lead biker give a thumbs up to his buddies, his gloved hand reaching for the clutch. In that split second, I saw it all play out in my head. The bikes rolling down the hill, gaining speed, reaching the intersection at the bottom where cars whipped by at 50 miles an hour. I saw the chaos, the screech of useless brakes, the horrific tangle of chrome and bone, and I saw Mr. Henderson's smug, satisfied face. I didn't think. I just moved. I flew out of my room, my bare feet slapping against the hardwood floors. I wrenched open the front door and sprinted out onto our perfectly manicured lawn, the morning dew cold and shocking against my skin. I was still in my pajamas, a stupid pair of shorts and an old t-shirt with a faded cartoon character on it. I must have looked insane. I didn't care. Stop! The scream ripped from my throat, raw and desperate. It was barely audible over the roar of the first engine, but it was enough. The lead biker, who had just started to roll forward, turned his head. His mirrored sunglasses hid his eyes, but I could see the line of his jaw tighten in annoyance. I didn't stop. I ran straight into the middle of the street, planting myself directly in his path. My heart felt like it was trying to punch its way out of my chest. He was a mountain of a man on a monster of a machine. The bike idled, rumbling beneath him, a caged beast ready to spring. "Get out of the road, kid," he growled, his voice a low rumble like shifting gravel. The other engines died down one by one, leaving a tense, echoing silence punctuated by the throbbing of the lead bike. All eyes were on me. "Your brakes!" I gasped, pointing a trembling finger at his bike. "He cut them! He cut all your brakes!" My voice cracked, and I swung my arm around to point directly at Mr. Henderson, who was frozen on his porch, his coffee mug halfway to his lips. The smirk was gone, replaced by a mask of chalky white fear. "What the hell are you talking about?" another biker demanded, dismounting from his bike. "She's lying. She's a troubled kid, always causing problems," Mr. Henderson shouted, his voice high and reedy. "Call the cops on her. She's trespassing." "I saw you," I screamed back, tears of frustration and terror streaming down my face. "Last night, I saw you with the wire cutters. You went to every single bike." The leader, the one I had stopped, was silent. He slowly, deliberately reached down and squeezed his front brake lever. I saw it plain as day. The lever went all the way to the handlebar with no resistance at all. There was a soft, sickening squish. He looked down at the brake caliper, then back up. He lifted his mirrored sunglasses and rested them on his forehead. His eyes weren't angry, not yet. They were a piercing, glacial blue, and they were filled with a terrifying calm. He looked from me to Mr. Henderson, who was now sweating profusely, his eyes darting around like a cornered animal. "Spike," the leader said, his voice dangerously low. "Check the lines." The biker who had dismounted, a wiry man with a long goatee, immediately dropped to his knees beside the nearest motorcycle. He was under it for less than 5 seconds. He came back up, his face grim, holding up his hand. His fingertips were slick with fluid. "He's not lying," Spike said, then corrected himself, looking at me. "She's not lying, Ryder. Brake lines cut clean through. Same with this one. He bled them all." The air went from tense to solid. It was like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the street. The quiet hum of the suburbs was gone, replaced by a silence so heavy it felt like you could drown in it. Mr. Henderson made a tiny, choked sound and took a clumsy step back towards his front door. Instantly, two of the other bikers moved, flanking the entrance to his pristine walkway. They didn't run. They just walked, their heavy boots silent on the pavement, and stood there, arms crossed. They were human walls. The leader rider swung his leg off his useless bike. He walked towards me, each step deliberate, his boots sounding like thunderclaps in the stillness. He was huge, towering over me, a patchwork of leather and faded tattoos. He stopped right in front of me, so close I could smell the scent of worn leather, gasoline, and stale cigarette smoke. He looked down at me with those ice-blue eyes. For a second I thought he was going to yell at me too, but his face softened, just a fraction. "You got a name, kid?" he asked, his voice still a low rumble, but without the growl. "Leah," I whispered. "Leah," he repeated, tasting the name. He nodded slowly. "You just saved my life. You just saved all our lives." He glanced over his shoulder at Henderson, who was now visibly trembling. A flicker of something truly frightening crossed Ryder's face. It was a predator's smile. He looked back at me. "We owe you, and we always pay our debts." He turned away from me and started walking towards Mr. Henderson's house. The rest of the bikers fell in behind him, a silent, menacing tide of black leather. They parted for him as he walked onto the Hendersons' perfect green lawn, the one they were never supposed to step on. Ryder stopped in front of the terrified man and looked him up and down with utter contempt. "We need to have a little talk," Ryder said, his voice echoing in the morning air. "About neighborhood safety." He turned his head and looked back at me, standing alone and shivering in the middle of the street. "You should go inside, Leah. This part's for grown-ups." He paused, his gaze locking with mine, and the predator's smile returned. "Then again, you're the one who started this. You're part of this now. So you tell me. You want to watch?" I stood there frozen, my bare feet seeming to root themselves to the asphalt. Part of me, the part that had been raised in this quiet, orderly world of unspoken rules and polite facades, was screaming to run inside, lock the door, and pretend none of this was happening. But a bigger, angrier part, a part that had spent years feeling the sting of the Hendersons' quiet condescension, was captivated. I wanted to watch. I needed to see the pristine, manicured world of Mr. Henderson get torn apart, just like he had tried to do to them. "I'll watch," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Ryder gave a short, sharp nod of approval. He turned his full attention back to Henderson, who looked like he was about to faint. "So," Ryder began, his tone conversational, almost pleasant, which was somehow more terrifying than if he'd been shouting. "You thought it would be a good idea to try and kill a dozen people?" "No, I just wanted to scare you," Henderson stammered, wringing his hands. "To get you to leave. You don't belong here. The noise, the parties, you're ruining our neighborhood." "Ruining it?" Ryder let out a short, humorless laugh. He took a step closer, and Henderson flinched back, nearly tripping over his own welcome mat. "Buddy, we are the neighborhood now. And you know what we don't like in our neighborhood? We don't like rats. Especially rats who mess with our bikes." He gestured with his chin towards the Hendersons' garage. "Pop quiz. What's the most important part of your family car, Henderson? The thing you rely on every single morning to get your wife to her book club and your kids to their soccer practice." Henderson just stared, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Spike," Ryder said without looking away. "Go find out." Spike peeled away from the group and ambled over to the garage. The side door was unlocked. He disappeared inside for a moment, and then we heard a series of loud metallic snaps. He emerged a minute later, holding up a greasy set of wire cutters. "Look what I found," he said, dangling them from his finger. "Still a little sticky with hydraulic fluid." Ryder's smile widened. It was not a pleasant sight. "Now this is what we call a teachable moment." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The quiet menace in his words was more effective than any shout. He turned to the other bikers. All right, boys, let's start the safety inspection. What happened next was a form of methodical, almost artistic destruction. It wasn't wild or chaotic. It was precise. Two of the bikers walked over to Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning rose bushes, the ones she preened over every weekend, and with their heavy boots, they began systematically stomping every single plant into the mulch. Another pair went to the gleaming white picket fence, and with practiced ease started yanking the posts out of the ground, tossing them onto the lawn like discarded toothpicks. Spike walked over to Henderson's brand-new, top-of-the-line SUV parked in the driveway. He didn't smash the windows. He just took out a knife, a serious-looking blade, and calmly, deliberately, slashed each of the 4 tires. The hiss of escaping air was a long, slow sigh of defeat. Inside the house, I saw Mrs. Henderson's face appear in the window, a perfect porcelain mask of horror, before she vanished again. Through it all, Ryder just stood there, making sure Henderson watched every second. "You see," he said, his voice a calm lecture amidst the quiet carnage, "safety is about understanding consequences. You do something, something else happens. Action, reaction. It's simple physics. You cut our brake lines, we re-landscape." My parents' front door opened, and my dad stepped out, his face a mixture of confusion and alarm. He saw me standing in the street, the bikers on the lawn, the destruction in progress, and his eyes widened. He started towards me, but Ryder held up a hand, a gesture that was both a greeting and a warning. "Morning," Ryder said politely. "Your daughter's a hero, just helping our neighbor here understand the concept of community standards." My dad stopped, looking from Ryder to the broken fence posts to Mr. Henderson's ashen face. He was smart. He could read a room, or in this case, a front lawn. He saw the wire cutters in Spike's hand, and a flicker of understanding crossed his face. He looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. I just nodded. That was all he needed. He stayed on our porch, a silent guardian, trusting my judgment. Finally, Ryder seemed satisfied. The rose bushes were pulp. The fence was a pile of lumber. The SUV sat slumped on 4 flat tires. The bikers regrouped behind him, their work done. "Now," Ryder said, stepping right up to Henderson, his voice dropping to a whisper that I could still hear across the lawn. "This was the warning. You will pay to have every single one of our bikes professionally repaired, at a shop of our choosing. You will sell this house, and you will be gone within a month. If I see your face on this street after 30 days, we're going to have a much more in-depth conversation about vehicular safety. Do you understand me?" Henderson could only manage a series of jerky, pathetic nods. Ryder clapped him hard on the shoulder, a gesture that was almost friendly, but made the smaller man stumble. "Good talk." He turned and walked back towards the street, the bikers falling into formation behind him. He stopped when he got to me. He looked down, his expression unreadable. For a second, I thought it was over, but then he looked up at my house, at my dad standing on the porch, and then back down at me. "This ain't over," he said, his voice low. "A debt's a debt. He's not the only problem in this neighborhood, is he, Leah?" He didn't wait for an answer. "You live here. You see things. You know who else shares his opinions." He looked around the cul-de-sac, at the other houses where I knew curtains were twitching. His gaze was cold and calculating. "We're going to clean house, and you're going to be our eyes and ears. You're going to tell us who needs a safety inspection next." I felt a jolt, a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. Me? Their eyes and ears? I was just a teenage girl who liked to draw. But looking into Ryder's intense, unblinking stare, I knew he wasn't really asking. He was anointing me. He had seen the quiet injustice we'd lived with, and in his own brutal, terrifying way, he was offering me a sledgehammer to smash it. He saw me not just as the girl who warned them, but as an ally, a fellow outsider in this land of manicured lawns and poisoned smiles. "Okay," I said, the word coming out small but firm. He gave that same short, sharp nod. "Good." He pulled a worn leather wallet from his back pocket and took out a folded piece of paper. It was a list of names and numbers. He scribbled something on the bottom and handed it to me. "My number's at the bottom. You call me if you need anything. Anything at all. And you call me if any of these other plastic saints," he gestured vaguely at the other houses, "decides to get brave." And with that they turned their attention back to the practical matter of 10 disabled motorcycles. The next few hours were a surreal spectacle. A flatbed truck arrived, summoned by one of the bikers, and they methodically loaded each gleaming machine onto the back. There was no shouting, no anger, just a quiet, focused efficiency. The rest of the neighborhood remained hidden behind their doors, the silence on the street now one of fear rather than judgment. They had seen what happened when you poked the hornet's nest. The Hendersons were true to Ryder's word. A "for sale" sign was hammered into their ruined lawn less than a week later. They moved out in the dead of night, not even bothering with a moving truck, just cramming what they could into a rental van. They were gone. Just like that. The constant source of low-grade animosity that had been a fixture of my entire life vanished. But Ryder's words had changed something in me. I started to notice things differently. I saw the way Mrs. Gable from 3 houses down would cross the street to avoid walking past the biker's house. I heard the muttered comments from Mr. Peterson at the block party about those people bringing down the tone of the neighborhood. It was the same venom they used to reserve for my family, just redirected. A couple of weeks later, Ryder called me. "Leah, we're having a barbecue Saturday. To say thank you. You and your folks are our guests of honor." It wasn't a request. My parents were hesitant, but I insisted. My dad, I think, understood more than he let on. He'd seen the look on Henderson's face, and he knew a different kind of justice had been served that day. So that Saturday we walked down the street, past the twitching curtains, and into the biker's backyard. It was loud, filled with music and laughter, and the smell of grilling meat. The men who had seemed so intimidating were laughing with their wives and girlfriends, playing with their kids. They weren't monsters, they were just people. Different, sure, but people. Ryder greeted us at the gate with a genuine smile. "Glad you could make it." He handed my dad a beer and led me over to a long picnic table. "So," he said, sitting down across from me, "how's the neighborhood watch?" I hesitated, then told him about Mrs. Gable and Mr. Peterson. I told him about the little things, the whispers, the glares, the 1,000 tiny cuts of prejudice that defined life in the suburbs. He listened patiently, his blue eyes never leaving my face. When I was done, he just nodded. He didn't promise more destruction. He didn't threaten anyone. "People are scared of what they don't understand," he said quietly. "Sometimes you just gotta give 'em a reason to understand." The next week strange things started to happen. Mrs. Gable's prize-winning poodle, the one that always yapped at us, mysteriously got loose and was found, unharmed, in the biker's yard, being fed steak scraps by Spike. He returned the dog with a polite smile, remarking how cute it was. Mrs. Gable looked terrified, but after that she started giving a tight, nervous wave whenever she saw them. One afternoon Mr. Peterson came out to find his morning paper on his doorstep, along with a perfectly ripe tomato from the biker's surprisingly well-tended garden. There was no note. The passive aggression of the neighborhood was being met with a kind of benevolent intimidation. It was confusing, unnerving, and shockingly effective. The dynamic of the street shifted. The fear was still there, but it was being replaced by a grudging respect. The bikers started waving first. They offered to help my dad with a heavy piece of furniture. They hosted a 4th of July party and invited the whole block. And to my utter shock, some people actually came. I realized then what Ryder was doing. He wasn't trying to burn the neighborhood down. He was forcing it to integrate. He'd used the Hendersons as a surgical strike, a demonstration of consequences. But his real plan was more subtle. He was making it impossible for people to ignore them, to treat them as a faceless monolith. He was making them neighbors. Our family was a part of that too. We were no longer just the black family. We were the family who knows the bikers. The fear and suspicion that used to be directed at us was now deflected. We had become, in a strange way, untouchable. For the first time in my life, I felt completely, unshakably safe on my own street. The suburban hum was different now. It was punctuated by the rumble of a Harley, the sound of classic rock mixed with the distant chime of an ice cream truck. It wasn't the sound of conformity anymore. It was the sound of a neighborhood that was messy, complicated, and finally starting to feel like a real community. And in the middle of it all was me, the quiet girl with the sketchbook, who had found her voice by screaming in the middle of the street, and in doing so had helped rewrite the rules of our perfect little world.